This episode of Gather and Go is sponsored by Coastal Mississippi. Play Coastal Mississippi. 62 miles of shoreline, outdoor adventures, casinos, fishing, and fantastic food. Perfect for fun-filled itineraries. Visit coastalmississippi.com and go have some fun for fun's sake. All right, everybody. My guest today has curated and led tours throughout Europe and the UK for over 2 decades. Drawing on her experience as a trip coordinator, travel planner, guide, and tour director, in 2020 she launched Sudden Journeys Travel, a boutique tour company that creates multi-generational experiences focused on inspiring curiosity, wonder, and deep cross-cultural connections. Kyle Campbell, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Ryan. I'm excited to be here.
I am so glad to have you here. Your story is a unique one, I feel like, in the tourism industry. For starters, it's unique because you kind of came into tourism fairly earlier in your career, as opposed to many people who have some other career and then switch over to tourism. Can you kind of give our audience an overview of your tourism journey, sort of how you got started in the industry and what the road that brought you to today kind of looked like?
Yeah, so I was thinking a lot about this question, and it started with I needed a job, and I was a college student. I was in art school in Savannah, Georgia. I also grew up with horses, riding horses, and there was a day where I was coming out of an art class, out of painting, and across the building was the stables for where in Savannah there's all these carriage tours, and they would park the carriages and the horses lived it. So I went over and I said, "Do you guys happen to need any stable hands to muck stalls or groom horses?" And they said, "No, but we do need tour guides." And I
Mm-hmm.
thought about it. I thought, well, I like people. I enjoy history. I love storytelling. This would be a new challenge. So why not? And it was honestly the hardest test I've ever taken to become a licensed guide in the state of Georgia. It was over 500 questions and I could only miss 5. And if I
Wow.
missed more than that, I would have to retake the test. And as a college kid at 20, $50 is a lot of money to retake a test. So I would practice at night riding my bike around the squares, calling all the stories. And as I was training to be a guide, I got to ride with the different drivers and hear the way they would tell the guides would tell their stories. And so it was interesting because I got to hear the same information but told differently. And that was really
Mhm.
helpful to realize I had the freedom to tell stories the way I wanted to. And so after a few months, I became a licensed guide and I was driving horse carriages around Savannah. But because I was a student, most of my tours were at night.
Mm.
And so if you don't know this, but Savannah is one of the most haunted cities in America. So I typically was leading ghost tours with a lot of Girl Scouts because also the founder of Girl Scouts is from Savannah. So
Yeah.
basically I was scaring Girl Scout girls most of the night. And then I was also scaring myself because then I would go back to the barn, put the horses up, and then bike back really fast and go to bed with the light on because I was like telling these stories. But that was the first entrance was as a 20-year-old tour guide in Savannah, Georgia. And then I moved overseas. I spent time backpacking around Europe and then decided I was going to live in Italy for a period of time and ended up finding a job. I needed money again. And I found a job to work with EF Tours as a um, tour leader. So I was trained, was hired, went through their intense training, but then by the end of it, they told me they couldn't give me enough work for the season, and I needed more money. So I moved back home, was back in my childhood bed, $12 in my bank account, slinging coffee at Starbucks and dreaming in Italian at night, thinking, why did I just do all of this?
Mm.
And through a series of connections, I found out about a travel company in Dallas, Texas, that was a student travel nonprofit organization, and they needed Europe guides who spoke Italian. And so then a few months later, I found myself back in Italy, in Florence, where I had lived, leading a group of kids from Tennessee. And I remember very clearly thinking, this is what I was meant for. And that was at 25. So that really was the beginning of my journey as a tour leader. But then if you've ever worked for a nonprofit, you wear a lot of hats. And so in the
Yeah.
course of my time working for this organization, I was a contract guide to a assistant trip coordinator. Became for a year, I was the creative director because I went to art school, so I was doing all their marketing and branding. I was designing their art tours, both domestically and internationally. Then I was the director of the Europe department, and then I was also leading all of our trips throughout Europe. So it was difficult, but also it gave me a lot of perspective in all these different arenas that I feel is only helped me do my job much better because of that. So that was really I did that for over 14 years. I worked with them. So yeah, that was kind of how it all came together.
Yeah. It's amazing all those skills that you pick up along the way you may not be realizing when the marketing gets laid in your lap, or when, hey, can you plan the logistics on this transfer from the airport gets laid in your lap. But you take all those things collectively and they become the skill set necessary to launch your own tour company. So tell us, what was the deciding factor there to start Sudden Journeys, and what were some of the lessons from your past that you drew on that kind of allowed you to form your unique approach to travel?
That's such a fabulous question. I would say that the lessons that I've carried along the way, the first one, and if anyone has been a tour leader for any length of time, it doesn't matter how well you plan, how well the trip is planned for you, or you plan the trip, how well you execute it, something always goes wrong.
Mm,
And so I would say a big lesson I've learned is that there's always a solution to every problem, even if you want to crawl under a rock and die and pretend like you don't have to deal with it. You have to, because you have all these people depending on you. And also you're setting the tone for your trip. And so they're watching to see how you respond in what can seem like an overwhelming situation where they want to panic, but you're the voice of calm and peace. And it's been a huge lesson. It was not only are there always solutions to problems, but you always start with what you know. And so rather than just constantly sitting there like, well, I don't know what we do about this, it's like, all right, what do I know? How can we get through this? And so that's given me a lot of courage to be able to do things that seem a bit ambitious or intimidating or overwhelming logistically, to realize I know if I've gone through what I've gone through, if you get a bunch of tour leaders together in a room, we're going to sit and tell you all kinds of stories of things we've
right.
overcome.
Right.
Um, but then I would say that, that's the more pragmatic side of lessons that I've learned. The other one that I think is even more important to what I do is the power of listening to your guests, to listening to those who are traveling with you, to asking questions. And you never know when you have an opportunity to interject something because you had a conversation with one of your guests, that you can provide a moment that they wouldn't have had you not asked those questions. And there's a moment I remember when I was with a student group in Greece and I was doing a Footsteps of Paul tour. And I was talking to this one young man who was probably 15. And I asked him what he was most looking forward to on the trip. And he said, I really want to go to Patmos. I'm excited for Patmos because the book of Revelations is my favorite. And
Mm,
I thought that was interesting. And so when we were on Patmos and we're standing in front of the cave of Revelations, I asked this young man to read scripture there, and he just lit up. Like group of 50 kids. I could have easily just given the information and shared scripture and then gone on to the next thing. But it was finding that moment to say, this is for you. And that's probably what he remembered, was that moment, connecting to it. And so I've finding those little moments to connect with people has become something I'm always looking for. And it's driven me to always take advantage of those moments. I think another opportunity I had with a group, I had a couple on a trip, and I was telling them the history of a house we were at here in England where we were having afternoon tea. And because their last name is unique, it's called Purefoy. I said, well, there was a family that here in the 15th century with their same last name, which perked curiosity. So then that night they're at dinner on their own and they're researching their ancestry. They find out that their family ancestors were from literally 2 miles down the road from where we were, and they had no idea.
wow.
And they're trembling. They couldn't believe it. And so then I said, do you want me to come pick you up right now? And I'll take you to the village. And they were like, what is happening? And so I took him into the village and I dropped him off at what's called the Queen's Walk. It's where there was a castle there. It's been there from the 1100s. and they walk along this path that goes up to this church, and it was at dusk. And I'll never forget dropping them off and then walking into the churchyard. And I said, I'll meet you on the other side and you come back. And again, one of those moments that had I not engaged those conversations or had the curiosity or pointed something out, they would have had those moments. And so I feel like that has become a huge part of what my trips are about. Um,
Yeah.
so yeah.
Yeah. Oh, that's wonderful. I love that approach, and I love that flexibility because there are definitely tour leaders or even company owners out there who would say, "Well, guys, we have an itinerary, and your little village is not on it. So if you want to go there, you'll have to come back on your own." So I love you just being able to seize the moment like that. Now, so you mentioned experience with students. You mentioned an adult couple. There are many tour companies that say, I pick one of those lanes and I run in it. I'm a student tour company. I'm a adult company. I'm a seniors company. You have kind of taken the tack of saying, I'm just going to put together great trips. And you end up sort of attracting a bunch of different ages and generations. So, uh, how does that work for you when you get, boomers and millennials and Xers and maybe some Gen Z all on one trip? A lot of people would say, oh, that sounds like a mess. How does it work out for you?
I honestly love it. From the beginning when I this started my company, I wanted it to be available for anyone really from ages 10 more or less up into, I mean, I have quite a few people in their 70s, as long as they can still physically walk and enjoy the trip, that I wanted it to be open to all genders, demographics, ages. It didn't matter because we all have something to learn from one another, and so I've really enjoyed that. It's been a
Mm,
surprising. I wasn't sure what I was going to get, and it's been surprising to see how almost every trip has been a mix. And it's been beautiful to witness it, just to see it kind of unfold naturally.
yeah. So tell me about some of those dynamics. Like, are the younger people and the older people, do they approach each other cautiously at first and then kind of warm up, or is it pretty quick camaraderie?
Before the trip starts, I always send out an introduction email where I send photos and a little glimpse of each person, where they're from. So they already have a little sense of one another, and so they kind of take off some of those points that they've learned through just the email alone. But
Hmm.
I would say it doesn't matter if I've worked just with student groups or if it's multi-generational. Day 3 is always the magic day. I don't know what it is. I've been doing this long enough now to see it happen, but day 3, I just see this emergence of the groups coming together, and the conversations are more effortless and comfortable, and you see one another being curious about each other and asking more questions and mixing up on the coach or on a dinner. And so it's been, it's I haven't seen there to be any issues, which has been nice because I haven't had to force it,
Yeah.
the mixing of people. And in fact, in my last group, I had an 11-year-old boy, and he was such a sweetheart and just just well mannered and respectful and vivacious and had a bright light to him, and he brought youthfulness. And on the last night at dinner, I always ask the question, what left an impression on you on this trip and why? And he said he said, I thought that I would be cast away because of my age, but I
Mm.
wasn't. And he got vulnerable and he started getting choked up, and then we were all getting choked up. And he was just being honest about how he felt so welcomed by everyone and included and how much that meant to him. And it was so endearing and tender, and it gave so much to us that he wanted to be with us.
Yeah.
So it's been a really fun to witness.
That's amazing, and I think of that 11-year-old or teenagers today certainly struggle with technology and screen time and finding a balance and a real life outside of that. So, this kid had whatever it was, 5 or 7 or 10 days to explore Europe and get to know people, and not have his nose stuck in the phone. I mean, what an incredible, enriching experience for that kid, right?
Absolutely. And we had this last group, I had a couple that would be considered millennials. They were, I think, 31, 32, a couple dual income, no children. and they live a lifestyle that it made me question how boring my life is, because they were doing these talking about their themed, card night, like, game nights and themed parties and all the ways that they have community, and I thought, "Wow," as you get older, you get kind of in your routines and you get into these comfortable rhythms of life, and they gave us a lot of ideas for things. I thought, "Oh, wow, we could be incorporating these into my life more," and so it's just fun to learn and just to witness how other people live life, and that's such a gift that we can all give each other on these trips.
Yeah, I love that. Now, you've told me before that as you have taken out groups from different generations, you sort of started to perceive some of the recurring needs or the desires people have in travel, or the way that people, have their needs met through travel, and those needs are different for different generations. So, can you sort of give us an overview of what the boomer customer really is looking for versus what the millennial resonates with, and wherever Gen X is, Gen X, we get lost so often. But how do you see those generations, expressing and seeking out needs in travel?
Yeah, it's also a great question. So with the older generations, I have a lot of people who are traveling with me that are retired, and for them, they are living out dreams that they've had for decades, that they've waited to travel. This has been on their list, and so they're actualizing these dreams, and they have a wealth of experience behind them in their life. And so for them, their needs are everything from, um, just those dreams in them of themselves, of actualizing them with them, and but also they'll have a lot of need for help with just the logistics of understanding how to take trains and how to use the technology and how to purchase train tickets or use the apps, or and so you're having to attend to those, just the logistical needs, but then also understanding that they have this decades of desire that they've waited to do this trip. Whereas I'll have people who are anywhere from 19 to late 20s, early 30s, and they're extremely savvy with all the technology. They don't need their handheld at all, but then they have a desire for connection that they've missed out on, that they're
Mm,
worn out from working from home, from online communities, that they're craving connection. And so it's been having to keep both of those things in mind when I'm putting these trips together, that it's not an all this way or all that way, and that you have to just follow me in it. I'm having to kind of, for instance, just a simple thing is I'll email you. You can get the PDF of the itinerary that you can download, or you can access it through an app. But then I also will send a physical booklet, because I know the older generations love to feel something tangible they can look at and read. So it's just learning how to, um, attend to the different needs of the different generations, and not see that as a hindrance, but just as, this is what I need to do in order to cater to the different generations.
yeah. As you're saying that, it kind of triggered this thought in me that many of those people who are retired and coming on trips, they may be on an adventure they have deferred for 10 or 20 or 30 years, right? I mean, I think about, you and I are kind of in the same age group, similar phases in life. We got families at home, we got obligations, and there are tons of things that I would love to do. And I'm just kind of making a list of like, well, when the kids are grown, when the mortgage is paid, like one day in the future, there's all this stuff I would love to do. And when those people in that more advanced phase of life come on your trip, they're not just coming on a trip, but in many cases, they're bringing decades worth of saved and reserved hopes and dreams, and entrusting you to fulfill those. And that is a huge responsibility.
Yes, it is, and it's an honor too. It's a huge responsibility that at this stage of my career, I'm not intimidated by it. I see it as an honor and a positive challenge, because I know what I'm gonna deliver for them. They don't know, but I know.
Mm,
And I get enough positive feedback that continues to affirm what I'm doing for them. But then I love the younger generations. I had a 19-year-old on a trip recently, and her mom actually signed her up for it. She followed me on social media and just felt like I was a safe person for her daughter to experience her first time to travel abroad. So she entrusted me with her daughter, and she was just full of life and brought the best energy to the group, and she was so excited about everything, and it was all new for her. And that newness was similar to those who were older because it was all new for them, but they maybe were a little more reserved with their um, delight and surprise, whereas the 19-year-old was more expressive. And it was just it's fun to witness both because
Yeah.
it's it's just an honor to be able to serve them in both capacities.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. So you make a real point of creating opportunities for people to not just see sights on a trip, but really have meaningful moments, deep conversations, authentic connections. Can you share a little bit of your strategy, like how you create those moments? Are you planning them in advance? Are they just organic? Are you seizing an opportunity when you see it? What does that work out like?
So this is very much at the core of what I love to do. Whether you're coming to my house for dinner or you're on a trip with me, or you're sitting next to me on a plane, you're probably going to engage in a deep, meaningful conversation, or DMC is what it's called. I spent time at a girls' camp in North Carolina, and that's what they would encourage the DMC, a deep, meaningful conversation.
I love it.
And but it's a natural place for me to go, and so I it's not that I have to plan it as much as I've cultivated this way. But for those who want to understand how to incorporate that, for me, it's been dinner is the biggest way to is and but in order to have that at dinner, you have to create an atmosphere and a space of intimacy. So I will specifically choose restaurants or hotels with restaurants in them that are intimate. So I'll bring candles. If you've ever seen on Instagram, I'm always sharing about our dinner here at home. We eat by candlelight because it's so dark here in the winter. So we always eat by
Mm.
candlelight. So I bring that when people go on trips with me and then we have dinner together, they're like, I feel like I'm at Kyle's house having dinner with her because we're eating by candlelight. And so
Wow.
I will make a point to bring candlelight and flowers and set the tone of intimacy so that it draws people in. And then usually between either starters and the mains or after the mains are finished and before dessert, I'll ask a question that's not a yes or no question, but one that provokes thought and processing the questions together. And it's always a great time to get to know one another better. And then the other opportunities I find are when you're going from maybe the end of an activity before dinner. Say you've got 20 or 30 minutes, and it would be real easy to tell people, "Oh, just hang out. We'll hang out here," or people will sit and scroll on their phones and but wait, just kill time. And instead, I'll use that opportunity to have a conversation, maybe about something more specific that has to do with where we are culturally to give more insight. Or sometimes they'll use that time to ask me questions about my own life, and it just naturally leads to conversation that's more vulnerable, that's more intimate, and it's an opportunity for them to know me more. But those are the two main ways that I create that space for conversation.
Yeah. Are you tying those conversations and questions into something in the trip experience, a place you've seen or a person you've met, or is it kind of just the sky's the limit? Talk about anything in life.
Uh, it both. It's discerning the tone of what's happening. If I've overheard certain things being said, it'll provoke me to think about. I want to know more of how everyone feels about this certain situation. Other times, I have questions that I'm curious to know. For instance, this last tour that I gave was here, right where I live in Northamptonshire, which is north of London, and it's not a known area of England. And I was curious to know why these 12 people chose to join this trip. It's called the English countryside, knowing nothing about it.
Mm.
That something drew them to this place that they knew nothing about. There's no guidebooks on it. You don't ever hear about it. Completely unknown. And so it was interesting just to hear all their reasons for why they chose to go on this trip. And one person said simply they just wanted to see the bluebells, this bluebell woodland that I took them to that was, I mean, it was stunning. It showed off for the group. I was relieved because sometimes it can
Yeah.
be late in the season. And she said, I traveled all this way because I wanted to see those bluebells that you would share about. And so sometimes it wasn't they're not necessarily profound answers. They're just simply sharing what it is that draws people into these places. And then there's other times where I am more intentional, and I have with student groups, there's often a theme to the whole trip. And sometimes I don't know that in advance, but I will follow the line throughout each day and kind of paying attention, and then bring those ideas together, and then we'll discuss them in the evening, and kind of tie all those thoughts together to create a bigger picture for the whole trip.
Yeah, and especially for students, connecting the dots for them like that can really be meaningful and help them come away with not just a I had a great trip, but really change their perspective on on the world, on life, on who they are. So I really applaud that. Now I know something else that you are really passionate about is creating space for people who maybe have been through some difficult situations to have some healing or some peace. How do you do that in a travel context?
Yeah. So, when when I first had the idea for Sudden Journeys, it was before the pandemic, and I was approaching it from one perspective, and that was uh, honestly not as interesting.
Hmm.
And then the pandemic hit, and I was pretty devastated because it put everything to a halt, and and it gave me a lot of time to reevaluate. I think all of us reevaluate certain priorities in life and what we're doing. And on the redemptive side of coming out of the pandemic for me was this desire to bring people to these places in order to instill um, a sense of wonder and awe, but also to be re-enchanted with the world again, because we came out of something that was collectively as a global community traumatic.
Hmm.
And so there was the collective trauma of what we went through. But then we're human beings and living on this earth, we're not unscathed from suffering. And knowing that it's uh, it's it's a known fact we've all gone through something. You don't have to ask the question, have you gone through something? Rather, it's acknowledging, I don't know what's brought you here. I don't know what stage of life you're at, but it's knowing you've probably gone through something. And so what I do on these trips, and I don't always have this planned out. Again, it's really discerning the moment. But on this last trip, for instance, here in the countryside, we were I took him on a woodland walk. It's a medieval woodland that's ancient, and there's all the wild garlic is in bloom, and it's stunning. As far as I can see, you see wild garlic blooms, and it's fragrant, and the bluebells are full in bloom. And we did a walk, and then at the end of it, I stopped them, and I talked to them about how much I love the Brits' ability to observe nature and to slow down and understand the sound of birds and identify them by their song, and identify plants and flora and fauna and all of these things at observation. And but then I just said, why don't you take this 30 minutes now to go and just be still, be present, to calm your spirit, to listen, to hear, to allow your senses to be aroused and stimulated, and to give yourself that permission to feel things that maybe you haven't allowed yourself because you go, go, go. And so it's acknowledging those things, and it's giving them the space. And oftentimes I'll read a poem, or I'll read uh, a short story, or something to set the tone for the moment and give them pause to feel and immerse themselves in that space. And so I do that several times throughout my trips. And I'll notice out of the corner of my eye oftentimes somebody wiping a tear away, and in those moments I don't feel there's no need for me to rescue them or to say, "Oh, what's wrong?" But I'm grateful that they feel safe enough to allow themselves that place to grieve or to feel or to be moved. Maybe it's just gratitude that they're feeling,
Hmm.
but it's really at the end of the day, if they had to cross an ocean to feel that moment, then it's an honor to give them that soft place to land.
Yeah. It also occurs to me that those moments are not possible if your tour is rushed, if it's a packed itinerary, if it's go, go, go. So tell us about your approach to timing. How structured are your itineraries? How much space are you giving yourself? Do people ever say it was too much free time or like, how do you plan it and how do people react to it?
So far, the response I've been given is everything was perfectly timed,
Mhm.
which is which is wonderful to hear that feedback. But I think I've been on those trips where they've been too much. Like, just you're out the door at 7 in the morning, you're back at midnight every day,
Yeah.
walking 20 miles. It's exhausting.
Yeah.
And then you don't feel like you ever got to experience a place. But then I've also, on the flip side, been when they were given too much free time, at least with student groups. With adults, they want autonomy, and I tend to draw a lot of introverts who want
Mm.
some alone time, and I'm aware of that. And so
Mm.
I try to build in at least one day where there's a good amount of just free time where they can do whatever they want. Where sometimes I'll have dinners planned some nights, and other nights they can do what they want. And I think they love having that the balance of both, where there's enough structure and there's enough things to do. But even when we're doing these activities, I never wanna chain them to a guide, the whole a local guide. I don't wanna get them all this way for them to see something incredible, to be with a local guide the whole time, and then you're saying, "Right, you've got 20 minutes and then get on the coach."
Right.
And I wanna get people to these places, so I'll utilize the time maybe on the coach to give them history and then get them there, and then say, "Now you can go roam and reimagine your own story here, experience the space in your own way," so that you're not with a guide the entire time, and people love that.
Yeah. That is innovative. It's something that would scare a certain number of sort of old school tour operators, but I can see it being really, really fulfilling for your customers. So, as you look out on the horizon, the future for Sudden Journeys and for tourism in general, what are you hoping to see, say, next year and beyond? I don't get the impression that you're on a world domination path. So, how do you, sort of intentionally and thoughtfully plan ahead for the future of your own company?
I am in this season of the wonderful season of growing pains, of of asking myself the same question of where am I going with this and why? And I'm one of the things I'm really excited about is I'm doing a lot of partnering with writers and musicians, with artists who have wanted to create experiences for their audience, but don't have the time or the ability or the know-how to create these trips abroad. And so they come to me and they say, can we partner?" And which I love, because then I'm not having to market it. I don't have to go find the people because it's all through them, but I get to do what I love, which is create this trip for them, this experience, whether it's a workshop or a treat or a tour. And so I'm really enjoying that. I'm getting more and more of those connections. And it also allows me just to get really creative with what we do, because really it's the sky's the limit. You can create whatever you want, and the people who want it will come. And I tell people this all the time who are insecure about creating something. I say, look, there's 8 billion people in the world, and all you need is 12. That's it.
That's right.
And so you can make that happen. There's 12 people out there who want what you want to provide. And it's how you go about sharing what that is. And so that's been a fun thing to do. And then I'm also listening to people and what they want as I'm sharing about where I travel, rather than me creating trips out of what I think people want or what would be fun. I'm just getting the feedback, and then I'm creating trips around that feedback. For instance, I was recently in Paris, and I often get, and I'm always in London because I live near London, so I'm always getting people saying, I just want to go where you go. I just want to travel the way you travel." And so I thought, well, then I'm going to put together a London Paris trip that is basically, if I were just going by myself, this is exactly what I do. Stay out late listening to jazz in
Mhm.
Paris, or I'm a photographer first and foremost. So in London, I love going out past 10 o'clock at night on a weeknight in Soho and capturing scenes. So I'm going to take a group of people capturing scenes through the streets of Soho. So it's fun to think about trips in a way that I never was able to before when I worked for another company. Um, and then as far as where I see travel as a whole going, I think it's a really exciting time, because though I find that travel, and I'm sure you understand this, given you've been in the industries about the same time I have, the world feels so on fire and humanity on its knees.
Mm.
And the beautiful part of being a part of this industry is that we are part of the antidote to the divisiveness of and the misunderstanding of people, that we get to be a part of bringing people together and imparting understanding and insight into cultures and places, and it's an exciting time to have the opportunity to do that, and there's a responsibility that comes with that. And the one thing I'm very excited to do is creating a podcast that I'm finally putting together that will give me another platform where not everybody can travel with me and come on a trip with me, but as a travel guide, you're a storyteller too. And it's really easy to get in the mindset of imparting knowledge and information or being on the other side of it and consuming it. But I believe that we have a huge responsibility with travel, that we don't just consume our experiences and what we know, it's what do we do with what we know. And so part of what I am passionate about and is very much a part of how I teach on my trips is knowing that that's at the heart of it. How do I do that with the podcast to reach more people? And so I'm really excited to curate that next platform. And yeah, so it's exciting, with the opportunities that can come from that.
Yeah, absolutely. I am right there with you. I agree 100% about the moment we're in and the opportunity we have to, just like you said, be the antidote to so much of the division and acrimony that is making life miserable. Really, all around the world. It's not just here in the States, right? I mean, it's
Mhm.
challenging out there for everybody. So, yeah, I love that. So, what is the best way for people to follow you on social media or learn about your company and maybe even get in touch or get involved?
Yeah, so my website is mysuddenjourneys.com, and that's one way to find me. I'm active on Instagram. I'm told to be active on all the other social media, but I can only give attention to so much.
Right.
So Instagram is the best way to connect with me, and that's simply Sudden Journey. Is at Sudden Journeys. And if you send me a message there or through my website, then I'm absolutely willing to connect and have a conversation. And I'm also in the process of hiring guides and training guides to take over trips. And so that's a new phase of what I'm doing as well.
Yeah. Wonderful. I love it. Well, before we let you go, we have some questions we ask everybody, and these are just for fun. So, no pressure. You can just kind of answer off the top of your head. Uh, First question is, when you travel, do you book a window seat or an aisle seat?
Window seat always.
Yeah, just for the view?
Yes, I love the view.
Yeah, it's hard to argue with that. So, what's one thing in your carry on that you would never leave home without?
Oh my gosh. One thing in my carry-on, a good book
Hmm.
and my journal, definitely my journal. I've been keeping a journal since I was 14. And my journals tell my story and all the places I've traveled and recording all the moments and experiences. And I go back and I love to read about where I was on this date 7 years ago and where I
Hmm.
was. So absolutely my journal and a good book.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. So, if you had a free airline pass and a week with nothing else to do, where would you be headed next?
The country of Georgia.
Hmm.
That's one on my list. I'm love to explore that country.
Yeah. Yeah. Intriguing. I know so little about it. It would be fascinating to see it.
When they have this culture around, I think it's called Supra or Supra. I'm probably saying it wrong, but it's all around hospitality and gathering people over a meal, which I love, and so I want to experience that part of their culture.
Yeah. Oh, that sounds great. So, last question. What is one thing you have seen or done on the road that you wish you could go back and experience again with somebody you love?
Oh my gosh, that's such a great question. Um, hmm, there are experiences I haven't done that I've held off doing until I could do them with someone. But to go back and do things again, I don't, I don't know that I would. I don't know
Really?
that I would go back. Yeah, when I think about it, because some of those moments were meant just for me,
Hmm.
and I'm grateful for them. And I did just recently, one thing that was huge on my list that I've dreamt of for the longest time was experiencing, because I lived in Italy and I've spent most of my career leading tours throughout Italy, was to take my kids. And I did that this last March, and that was a dream come true, was
Hmm.
to to experience it through their how they saw it and what they enjoyed, and that was a lot of fun for me.
Yeah. Well, that sounds beautiful. I'm so glad you got to do that. I hope those other things that you're saving on the list all come your way as well, and you and your family can dig in and enjoy those times. So, Kyle, thank you so much for joining us. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you, Brian. I appreciate it.
Hey, thanks so much for joining us for this interview. I want to let you know that conversations like this are just part of what you will hear if you tune into a full episode of the Gather and Go podcast. When you listen, you'll get travel news you may not hear anywhere else, along with some really helpful road tips, some smart analysis, and maybe even a hot take from me about issues that are impacting travel right now. Now, you can hear this full episode along with many others by searching for Gather and Go in your favorite podcast player, or you can click on the link right below this video or one of the videos right here to my side. Thanks for watching. We'll see you again soon.